Hey, Oakwood small groups. As you gather tonight, we want to celebrate that we've come through the Gospel of Matthew and we're now in the book of Mark. And so as you've been reading that and as you've been going through it, we want to take a chance to be able to look at what Mark is about. So let's just talk about Mark for a little bit. One of the things that we find about Mark is Mark had several different people around him in his life that created influence. That in itself is a discussion about discipleship, about mentoring, about following Christ. What does that mean when we have people around us? John Mark writes the book of Mark. His main source for that book was Peter. But John Mark was also the cousin of Barnabas and was also on the journey with Barnabas and Paul when Mark decided not to go on that journey and Paul didn't want to take him. He also had Barnabas, who they were cousins. Barnabas went with Mark. We don't hear much about that for the longest time, and we see this rift almost between Barnabas and Paul. But what we do find is it wasn't that as much as Paul took Silas and Barnabas took John Mark, and what we find from that is the area of ministry with Paul grew. And we don't hear much about Barnabas after that, but we do find that in 2 Timothy, right there at the very end of that book, that Paul says, get John Mark, or get Mark, he's helpful to me. And it just becomes a great story even before we get into the book of John Mark, or Mark, that we start to hear this wonderful gift of friendship, discipleship, family, and the growth of the gospel through the relationships that it built. And that enough is something to talk about. So think about that. But also consider this. Mark also is different than the other gospels in that Mark is fast. He's running from story to story. There's a lot of healing miracles that are taking place, a lot of things with demon possession that are happening. And one of the things that we see with Mark is he's running really, really fast. And so in that, we read it quick, right? But in the middle of that, I wanted to just give you this scripture that you have a chance to look at it as you gather tonight. It's in Mark chapter 1, and it's in verse 35 through 39. Now, after you read that portion of scripture, it would really be important to not only think about the 4 questions that you typically go over, but one of the things that I think that it would be really interesting is just what does that mean in the life of everything that we've just heard about Mark, the ministry and the life of Jesus, and the role of discipleship, and why it took place. Mark 1, 35 through 39. But look at the story right in front of that, and the story right after that passage. When we look at those 2 stories and what we see is in the middle, why is that so important? And why should it be structured in our life? As you gather with your group, understand and gather and share the importance of what it means to disciple, to share, to grow together in ministry. And even the importance that we find with Barnabas and Paul, when they had to divide those ministries and how those ministries separately flourished rather than just staying in one area. Because from it, we have many other people that came around and cared for Paul. We have Barnabas that helped grow Mark. Mark shares the gospel through his relationship with Peter, and we have so much more. What does that mean for us as groups? And how do we do that well? Have a good night. Enjoy your discussion. Talk to you soon.